Okay, Rob, thanks. Over to you.
Okay, so just a short bit of background to myself. And our group, Cork Climate Action, came together, I think, in 2016 at first. One of the first, we kind of came together originally to organize a march before the COP. I can't remember which COP it was in 2016. So at first we were kind of campaigning a bit like that. We did various other events, including a flash mob, which I've meant to send the video to you about that, Oisin. But we kind of quickly coalesced around making these or doing these political, forums, or town halls, I suppose, as Oisin is calling them. So I'm going to tell you our experience of doing them, and hopefully it'll be of some benefit to you guys going forward. So I'm going to share a screen. I'm a moon tour, so I've got a PowerPoint ready and everything. So can you, a few people give me a thumbs up if you can see that? We're well used to teaching by Zoom as well, so great. So, as a background, we've run several climate action forums to date. We've always stayed in touch with Stop Climate Chaos when we were organising them. Cliona Sharkey, who would have worked with Oisin on Stop Climate Chaos, came to this forum that you see pictured here, which was in 2017. And we had organised it. We always stayed in touch, particularly with regard to what's coming up, just like Oisin has been explaining to us there now. So that we kind of were campaigning around something in particular, as sort of a concrete ask, I suppose, of TDs. For this event, we were Troker in particular. I think we're pushing to get the divestment bill into law, and that was the theme of this forum. And Cliona did say that she felt that this forum, the one that's pictured there, did play a massive part in getting the that particular law into through the Dáil. I came across we didn't specifically read up this on this indivisible movement, but I had come across it, and I think some of what they were saying resonated with what I had. From this indivisible guide, you can look up yourselves. What TDs care about, they care about their local constituents, and as opposed to what they don't care much about is for people from outside their constituency. These are kind of broad strokes, but at the same time, it's a good way of kind of guiding. This was an interesting one. They very much, the more effort that you put in, the more that they're aware. You show that they're honest, you actually do a letter, you telephone them, and for events that are going on, which is what I'm talking about, I suppose, that requires you to get up, to get out there and be there, and I think that type of effort is noticed. Anybody can send an email, or anybody can send in an angry tweet, or I suppose, in fairness, you do have email campaigns, and they may have some effect. Forward the next email or hit reply. Whereas when the more effort that politicians see is made, the more they know you mean what you're interested in, what you're talking about, and the more, I think I'd say, they multiply. If they see somebody showing up, they know that there's 10 or 20 people interested. They care about local and national press and editorials, less so, or much more so than they care about international trends and movements. Groups of constituents. And this was another individual campaign contributors. Perhaps maybe this was a bit more American than Irish, but when you've come together as a group, as opposed to just one single constituent, that is going to gain their attention more as well. This is, I mentioned already that we made a point of staying in touch with Stop Climate Chaos when we were organizing any of those events, and that was so that we could have this concrete ask, a verifiable action. They do like to be able to get back to you and say, yeah, I did that for you, as opposed to me getting on and saying, I'm really worried about climate change, and what's the concrete ask that you're asking them to do. So that's why it was always, we always had a specific ask, particularly at the end of at the end of any of our forums. And an interest group's endorsement. We never actually endorsed particular um, politicians or anything, but we very much did make it known that we appreciated their coming, that we appreciated their attention, that we would be following up, etc. And we were certainly happy that to be kind of, for them to kind of use the association with having come to our events. Okay. So in terms of actually organizing an event, a political forum, we first step was form a committee. We were always quite an ad hoc committee. It kind of, we didn't have a very formal structure about us. We were and still are, I suppose, a kind of coalition of different groups. Frank and Eileen and Maureen are all members of SHEP, Earth Aware, and Elders for Earth. I'm not sure if I'm absolutely correct about all the membership of those, etc. The initial meetings were very much, I think, SHEP were very much involved. Cork Environmental Network were another big presence, and Trócaire were another important kind of grouping that were at our original formation, I suppose.
Rob, sorry
and
to interrupt
then
you. Some people are saying that your sound is breaking up a bit. So perhaps while you're sharing your screen, will you turn off your video?
Okay. How do I do that? Stop video. Okay. Okay, so we have, as I say, perhaps that from our point of view, we never had a very strict committee member or organization. It was quite ad hoc, and whenever a particular event was coming up, we kind of found ourselves working in different roles, and that worked for us. We generally had around 6 or 8 weeks advance organization for setting up our events. For live events, and that's what I'm talking about mostly in this presentation, pre-COVID documents that I put together. Mondays worked well because for TDs who are going back to Dublin, the Dáil isn't that, I think that's right, Oisín, the Dáil is generally in session Tuesday to Thursday, and often TDs will be at home on Monday evening and will go back to Dublin on Tuesday morning. So we found Monday evenings was good availability. I've mentioned this already, have a main title or theme, a specific actionable ask. Our 2017 forums are about the divestment bill and the Citizens Assembly climate change deliberations. We had the title of our 2018 forum in East Cork was "The Citizens Assembly Has Spoken. How will your party respond?" And I mean, I suppose the point of that is we really wanted to focus TD's attention on this assembly and what people were demanding or asking through the assembly. Next step, invite panelists. So this is a bit of a trade-off. You can keep it constituency based, so it's very specific to your own constituency, but in truth we never did. Because it obviously limits the number of panelists and it limits the number of attendees. Our 2 or 3 of our forums were the 2 Cork South, or the 2 Cork Central constituencies. So we had we'd say 3 TDs from Cork South Central and 1 McBarry from Cork North Central. Then again, we did have representation from the Green Party. Grace O'Sullivan, who was a senator from the Green Party, would have been a panelist on some of those events as well. I remember discussing, would we have and again, from our point of view, this is what we decided. We decided we didn't want I don't know, secretaries or assistants. Instead, we felt, no, if we're asking elected representatives, then I think it's only fair that it would be only elected representatives on that panel. Similarly, we didn't have councillors, I suppose, when we were if we had TDs at the same time. You know, if it was members of Dáil Éireann, I suppose, then that's what we stuck with. Making that relationship is really important, and an awful lot of what this is about, I think, isn't just what happens on the night. I think it's the relationship that you begin to build up with that TD, based on, you know, both the organization and on what happens on the night. Um, so, for instance, once we had kind of organized our first one, it became much easier for us to ring the constituency office and ask them to come along to the second one. Eileen, who is there somewhere, for instance, was always like whenever we wanted, if we were getting onto Micheál Martin, Eileen had just, you know, struck up the right relationship with the constituency office and would always get a quick response. I would have gotten onto Micheál or Michael McGrath, or to Mick Barry as well. It doesn't have to be kind of party based, and I know Eileen is there going, I'm not in Fianna Fáil, I'm not in Fianna Fáil. But TDs don't, you know, they're not kind of keeping tabs of which party you're in or whatever. They know you're a voter. They know even if you're voting number one Green, and I'm sure they all thought an awful lot of the people at these forums are going to vote Green number one, but they know you've got a number two vote, and they do want, one way or the other, they are working for your vote, even if it's not your first choice vote. We aimed for panels of 4 or 5, and we went for a range of parties. Although, as you saw maybe from one of the photos there earlier, we did have like 2 Fianna Fáil, 1 what are they called? McBarry from People Before Profit, and 1 from Sinn Féin. So that, you know, you don't always get the range of parties that you want, but uh, then again, I would say 4 or 5 was good for an in-person event. Maybe we'll have a few questions about how it would run on Zoom afterwards. Um, I always felt it was good to tell them how many people you expected to come to that event. Now, of course, you don't know until the night, but I you know, I didn't want them. I didn't want to be telling them, oh, there's going to be 100 people there, and then they show up and there's only 20. Yeah, I felt it was better to yeah, no, be optimistic, but don't let them be disappointed on the night when there's not many. You know, if there's less than you expect. Um, we always got, where we tended to get hotel rooms, and paid hotel rooms. It looked after, you know, in terms of microphones and everything like that is all looked after there. That does cost money, and but generally speaking, we've always managed to pay for it by just passing around a hat on the night. We didn't charge attendance, but people were very happy to throw in some money, including actually the TDs. If you got 200 people out in front of you, like if they saw 200 voters out there or 150 voters, they were very happy to throw in 20 euros and get a chance to speak to them. I do think it's important to get as many people into the hall, so they are taking time out to speak to their constituents, and you do need to have those constituents there. But as I say again, by having those kind of combinations of constituencies, we didn't get people to identify the exact constituency they're from. So, you know, the Cork North Central TDs didn't know where in Cork the people in the audience were from. So there's a little bit of obfuscation there probably was helpful. So we had about 60 at our first event. And I think the panelists were very impressed. At that event that you may have seen photos of, I think there was, you know, over 100 at it. And I think, you know, and like they were front bench Fianna Fáil TDs and Sinn Féin TDs, and they were also very impressed with the number of people there. So I think, but at the same time, then a rural constituency having a smaller turnout would also be of value. I'm sure TDs are well used to going to events where there's only a small handful of people there. Chairing it, we kind of we always try to get a chairperson, a professional journalist. Sometimes we got one of our best chairs was a radio presenter. But on other occasions we had newspaper journalists, and to be honest, they didn't do a huge amount of intervening. We're not talking you know, it's not like prime time on TV. We don't it isn't as kind of I don't know, it doesn't have to be as kind of professionally or formally run as that. But eventually I ended up chairing some of the meetings as well. Ultimately, it's kind of up to the TDs themselves you know, if anything, if there has to be probing of each other, you would be expecting them to do it as well. So, so yeah, that's one thing. One advantage of having a journalist chairing it though is that they will provide some of the promotion as well. Yeah, as I say, I think it was really important to promote it. We were doing flyers, posters, Facebook, email chats, just asking people to come. Really important to get a lot of people out. The format we did, we always had 2 or 3 questions organized, which we emailed in advance and asked them to prepare. So I think it made it easier for those candidates to come, or for the panelists to feel like, to know what the format of the night was going to be. They knew there was going to be, you know, if they could do their homework and get these questions answered, and then there were going to be questions at the end as well. But at least the tone of the night was set by these 2 or 3 questions, which were set in advance. We found that those 2 or 3 questions would end up taking over an hour anyway, which leaving maybe 40 minutes at the end for questions from the floor. So on the night, that was one of the events we had. I think it's the same one, yeah, that you saw the photos of Micheál Martin and Michael McGrath. On the night, for coming. I think personally, I feel TDs and politicians come in for an awful lot of slack. It's a really tough job as far as I'm concerned. You have so many people asking so many things. So we always thank them for their work on, you know, their public work, and thank them for coming on the night. Ideally, if you can thank them for a policy area, then that's great. Coming in and listening to their constituents' concerns. We'll have 30 or 40 minutes at the end of the night for questions from the audience, which is really important, and made sure that the audience were involved. And I think the TDs really liked that section of it as well. Mentioned specific actionable requests, gather email contacts, etc. Obviously, trying to get people's emails addresses so you can stay in touch with them in future, and thank the audience for coming as well, and assuring them that their attendance does make the difference. Finally, afterwards, go for a pint. You deserve it. We always did follow up to emails and to panelists and attendees. I think an awful lot of the real follow up though was, say, Oisín in Dublin, or you know, the kind of more professional lobbyists, I suppose. But I think Oisín will probably agree that, you know, the feeling that there was, that this wasn't just coming from somebody, a professional lobbyist in Dublin, on the ground in Cork Central or whichever constituency, are also really informed about this issue and concerned about this issue. So I think that way of working worked really well. We weren't very good at getting press coverage, but maybe Oisín would probably be able to tell a bit better about that. But we certainly did kind of Facebook stuff and made sure people knew that those TDs were at that event itself, etc. And then follow up over the weeks and months ahead. So that's basically how we went about it. I just put together a few questions because we had been discussing this. I've spoken to Frank and to Oisín and to Dominic Donnelly actually as well, another active member, about how would these town halls run in the near future if we were doing one in October. I've kind of very much come down on the side, and I think Frank agrees with me on doing it by Zoom. I don't think enough people are quite ready yet to be getting into a big room with so many people. But that does pose its own questions. Would you? I kind of have a feeling it should be maybe less panelists if it's on Zoom. Would you need a more experienced chairperson? Would the meeting be recorded? And how long would the meeting run, etc. So there are questions that I'm going to pose but not necessarily answer. And with that, I might go back to Oisín.
It's Rob, and well, when we come back to you for answering questions, we might leave your screen sharing for now so people can see the. Well, it doesn't matter for questions. I know that it takes up bandwidth, and it probably it makes the occasional breakup. Thank you very much for that. It was very, and I know I've talked to you before, but even still, for me, it was fantastic to see it all laid out so clearly. It makes it very understandable and actually kind of very imaginable. I can imagine it doing it. I'm going to ask people, do they have questions now, but actually just while you're thinking about the questions you might have, can I just do a quick exercise in the chat box? Rob has suggested he thinks definitely Zoom is more practical, shall we say, between now and November. But if you were organizing it, and not entirely your sole responsibility, but if you were involved in organizing it, do you think it's more practical to do it on Zoom or hotel? Of course, it mightn't be a hotel; it could be a pub. But for the sake of this exercise, can you type the word Zoom or the word hotel into the chat box just to get a sense of what people think? It seems to be a relatively. I'd love if anyone passionately believe we should be trying to do it in person. Zoom and hotel. Oh, interesting. Okay. Yes, hotel will exclude. Actually, that only came to me, Lucy. But yes, there's a risk that the hotel will exclude people who don't have a job. Very good point. If they're allowed in. So there's a high majority in favor of Zoom. It's good to test that though, because I think the same, but I'm in the same boat as all of you. This is a whole new world, so it's good to see what the wisdom of the crowd is. So do you have a question for Rob about his experience of running it? And Frank, I can see you want to come in, and I can do in a second. I'll call you. Or if you have a question for each other about, is this doable, and how would we do it? Feel free to stick an asterisk in the box in the chat box. Probably the best way, and I will see you and call you in and unmute you if I haven't been able to so far. So Frank, I see your hand up already. I think if you unmute yourself, you should be able to come in.
Yeah, am I unmuted? Just to add a couple of small points to what Rob so competently did. One was something that we hadn't planned, but it's relevant to the way our sessions turned out. And that was that Fine Gael were on their own in government at the time, and we never succeeded in getting any of them to come. And the reason I'm mentioning that was not to say anything about Fine Gael, but to say that it changed the tone of the meetings quite a bit. It wasn't a them and us. And in fact, we didn't encourage interdialogue either between the people who did show up. Each of them got their chance to speak. In fact, they got 2 or sometimes 3 chances to speak in turn to the audience. So it wasn't like a town hall. It wasn't like the presidential debates in America, that kind of thing. We hadn't planned it that way. We had planned that all parties would be represented. But I think it contributed a great deal. It makes things very complicated at the moment where 3 key parties are in government. And it's hard to know if you only took opposition people, but it's worth bearing that in mind, and in terms of the tone of the meeting. And that's the second point. I think it's really important that people be very clear from the beginning what the purpose of it is. And I don't mean just the theme, the focus of it, but I mean the purpose. And for us, and this evolved as well, the purpose was certainly not to get the politicians and not to vent our own anger at what was not being done. The purpose was to build a relationship with the politicians. That took a lot of hard swallowing at times when people would be waffling and so on. But we really set out to honor the politicians for what they were doing and to make this experience one that they would want to come back to. And I think that's worth mentioning. And I think one further tiny point, Rob was saying we were able to cover the expenses. This is if ever we do get back to hotels by a whip around. We didn't have any money on our committee. So it was a risk. So individuals had to guarantee the cost of the hotel in advance. As it was, nobody was out of pocket. It was even more the one time we got a radio presenter to chair the thing, and she asked for a fairly hefty fee. After the evening, she actually donated the fee back. So we didn't lose out on that, which was great. But we did have to we had to risk our own funding and risk that enough people would show up and contribute enough, and that if they didn't, that so we were taking risks in that sense because we didn't have any structure, any guarantee that we'd cover it.
Thanks, Frank. I see, Sean, I see a question, Sean Loughlin, I see a question from you that I can answer in a minute, or sort of answer. But I see a question from Peter Lucy in Cork asking, how much did it cost to book a room, roughly speaking?
Can you remember, Rob?
Oh, sorry, I don't know why. Try that now.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
200, 300, depending on the size of the room.
Depending on how central the hotel was in the city. It was cheaper when we went to Middleton, outside the city. It was cheaper when we went to a suburb up in St. Luke's. The city centre hotel was the dearest, and I think that might have been as much as 300, 350 or something, which seemed like a lot of money to people who had no money as a committee.
And I see someone saying here, Eileen from Wicklow, saying it's 100 to 150 to rent a big room in Wicklow. So obviously it clearly depends on the competition for hotel space or room space.
Yeah.
That's worth knowing. Actually, things where I see a question about senators, I'll come back to that in a second, Seamus. But Sean's question, things where the consensus, it would appear to be that this side of Christmas, we're doing it if it's happening on Zoom. Someone asked a question, do we have technical issues with Zoom with large numbers? I mean, the answer to that was mostly no. I mean, there's the general challenge of doing it, as we are tonight on Zoom, but and at one part, during one part of the mass lobby, when there was obviously 1,000 people over the course of the day, it got overloaded at times with breakout. You could only have a certain number of breakout rooms, and even when a breakout room finished, it was counting it. So a few times during the day, we had to close all the breakout rooms and start again. But that was a very particular, 13-hour Zoom meeting is a very particular phenomenon, with like over the course of the day, 100 breakout rooms. So I mean, there's always a risk with Zoom, but we have found it to be relatively stable for meetings and webinars over the last 18 months. But obviously, you can only see 20 people at a time. Sorry, it's a dog. You can only see 20 people at a time, and so it's more challenging than a room in terms of. But in some ways, it's more challenging. In some ways, we've got used to it, and it can actually make participation more even. Rob.
What I would say, I wasn't sure. I mean, what the November meeting would go like, or the mass lobby on Zoom. But I must say, I was very impressed with it. I thought the TDs seemed to be very engaged, and I think they weren't comparing. They weren't comparing it with something like the events we ran. Rather, they were probably comparing it with constituency clinic meetings where there's 2 or 3 people at most show up. Instead, they had a dozen or 20, and I think they were kind of comparing it with that. And it struck me as being really successful. That's why I'm more comfortable kind of proposing it or suggesting it for this one. At the same time, I do think at some point in the future, the in-person events, it will be good to get back to those as well. But it was possibly one advantage, as I say, of Zoom, that those 20 or 30 people, that the only 20 or 30 people you can see are possibly enough.
Absolutely. And just to say too, that we won't be prescribing what One Future, we can't anyway, we don't have authority to, but we won't be trying to prescribe what One Future groups decide to do locally around the country over the coming months. We'll be giving you the information about what's coming up, and access to some support and expertise, hopefully. And this is a suggestion of one thing that has been impactful when other groups have done it. I mean, we would say local contact between constituents and TDs is very powerful. It's even more powerful than when it's clearly centrally organized. When they see a local group organizing and wanting to interact with them, that's even, back to your Rob's equation, the more effort they see you've made, the more they pay attention to you. So while it's fantastic coming to Buzzwells for a mass lobby or coming to an online Zoom for mass lobby, when they know that you're organizing this yourself, but nor are you sort of a crank group who's been there for 30 years, just designed to annoy them. You are a group of concerned citizens. That really does add to the weight of the interaction. So, but for example, Rob mentioned the sort of online constituency clinic version. That option will be open to One Future groups too, if they're more comfortable with doing like one-on-one meetings with TDs. But we think there's a certain potential, shall we say, to doing political forums or town halls, whatever you want to call it, when more than one party is represented. So that's why we're talking about it now. Paul,
can I just come in with one more point there, Oisín?
Sure, Frank, and then Paul, you can unmute yourself and come in and ask the question yourself.
It's a risk to put on something. You need the numbers to impress them. If you put on something and have very few numbers, it's going to have a negative effect. It's going to show this is not important. So it's really important in some ways, I think, if it's possible, to be able to, as it were, have the troops that you can call up when you need them. If you have various organizations on your committee, then it gives you the possibility of already built networks, rather than trying to a small group organizing something and then hoping that enough people will come when you have no established networks. We didn't have that much networks, so to some extent it was risky. It seems to me with One Future, certainly in our core constituencies, we have a lot of people peripherally involved, but who don't come to all the endless meetings that seem to go on at the moment, which are discussing planning and so on. So if there's some way of keeping people on the books, as it were, who are prepared to show up once or twice or three times a year and no more, but that you have a group that you can call on with fair reliability of showing up. That's important, because if you put on something and only a half dozen people show up, that's saying the message it then comes across, this is not important to people.
Paul, just before you come into your question, just to add to something Frank said there, which is about getting the numbers up. Just to say, at the moment now, all of this needs to be tended to more than we've been able to tend to it in the last few months. But there are sort of layers of people who are interested in both One Future groups and in climate action or climate campaigning that we can help you access. So there are the WhatsApp groups set up in about, I think, 28 constituencies since the election and around the time of the lobby. Now, some are active still and some are pretty dormant. I know my one in Dublin Bay South is pretty quiet these days. But there are, anything from 8 to 30 people on some of those groups who you have direct access to. There is a Slack set up that I have to say I haven't been on very much. I don't think many people have been on yet. But then there are about 500 individuals who, in response to emails from the office, put it that way, have said, yes, I'm interested in being involved in One Future. So we have the ability to email. It's how you got the invitation for tonight. We have the ability to email that 500 and say, do you want to get involved in your local group, or this is coming up, so we can do that bit of mobilization. And then beyond that, of course, there is the 8,000 people on the Stop Climate Chaos list and the 30,000 people on the Friends of the Earth list, that if this is happening, we will be pushing out those messages, and we can segment that. We can say, tell me everyone who's in Cork North Central or Cork in general or whatever, and we can promote your events to those groups. We will be committing to helping you do that as much as possible whenever you are having a local event. Paul, and so I didn't mean to skip the question about senators. I'll come back to that. Paul, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. Thanks, Oisín. Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Frank. This is really great to get your experience on this. I was just wondering, in terms of approaching the TDs in the first place, did you guys set a date yourselves and then invite them along, or did you approach them first and try and organize a date that would kind of suit as many as possible? Like, did you send out like a when to meet or anything like that? And then if it was kind of like, if you're setting the date yourselves, what kind of sort of lead-in time did you kind of set? Like how many weeks in advance did you say, right, we're going to need this to do the promotion and all the rest of it before we go ahead?
So maybe I'll answer that. Frank, perhaps I should turn off the video. Sorry about this. It might be easier to hear. we were about 6 or 8 weeks in advance, and we broadly speaking picked a Monday evening, and pretty much we set the date. I think broadly speaking, I'd say, eventually you need to coalesce around a time or something. And TDs were always kind of hedging their bets. Even every evening, I remember at least twice, Micheál Martin had been saying to us, even up to the evening, listen, I'm not sure if I can stay for long. But when he arrived and there was enough people there, he stayed till the end. So I think you just need to pick the time. And I think I do remember that happening as well, that they were kind of non-committal until they felt they saw a bit of a buzz around it. So and it's understandable, they probably get asked to a lot of things, and until they kind of realized, okay, there is actually going to be a good number of people here, they were kind of non-committal. That about right, Frank?
Yep, I think so.
Rob, I will come to the next question in a second, but it does remind me two things. One is, first of all, I think we're in I know it's been a while since the mass lobby, but I think whatever the One Future Group's next Ask TDs, there'll be a residual respect for that. So you're likely to have a sort of certain amount of convening power of TDs because of that success. Now you still have to get the thumbs on seats, but they won't be going, who are you, what are you, why are you? Particularly the noise around climate as well. The other thing that's happening in November is the international UN conference. So again, that'll be in the ether, and then the IPCC report. So it's a strong, it's a very scary situation, but it's a strong moment to be asking for them to give some time to this question. While I go back to people who ask questions, can I just actually, you mentioned there the timing question. I'm going to ask people to answer this in the chat as we go along now, because it'll be really useful. This is another one that I'm not so sure for not just for TDs, but for all of you you chose to be able to come at 7 o'clock this evening. But we're at a bit of a loss as to what the best time is anymore. During the height of the first lockdown, when we were having 100, 200, 300, 400 people sometimes turning up to webinars, it was partly because there was nothing else to do. Nobody could commute, no one could go out, no one could do anything. So we actually had meetings often at 5 o'clock, and then certainly at 6 o'clock was, I think, our prime time, which is, basically during the time you'd otherwise be commuting was when we were having it. Now we chose to do this one at 7 on the basis that some people are now commuting again, and or they're having dinner with their family at 6 o'clock. So I'd be interested to know if people thought, now it might be half an hour each way, but if you while we're answering other questions in the next 10 minutes, can you put in the chat if you think 6, 7, or 8 would be the best time for a Zoom meeting for yourselves, first of all, and others who might come to hear about climate action and how to get involved. So 6, 7, or 8. If you want to express your preference, you can put them in order if you like. I'm now going to try and remember who's going to. Sean, you have a question. I'm still skipping that. No, Seamus, actually, sorry, on the senators. If you're there, Seamus, do you want to ask that question yourself? You can now unmute yourself at this stage.
Yeah, I wanted to ask the speakers about inviting. It's clear enough to invite TDs, and I take your point about inviting from more than one constituency. I'm in Galway West, but I'm right on the border of Galway East. And what would you feel about inviting senators? The reason is that, like, some of them, like, there are 2 senators, for example, who are former members of Galway City Council, so they'd be very well identified with this area. But there are other senators like them who are identified with Galway, but they're not, like, they're elected on a university panel or some other panel. And like, once you start picking them, then are you selective? Like, for example, a senator from Galway is a Green Party senator, and there's no Green Party TD. There's 2 Green Party senators in the west of Ireland and no Green Party TDs, to my knowledge. So how do you get around that one?
Well, we did. Will I get that again, Frank? We did have the same issue. We did want somebody from the Green Party, partly because actually, and in one way, there were a lot of people from the Green Party on our organising committee, actually. But we were careful that they didn't kind of take over or feel that they owned it or something. But nonetheless, yeah, we made a point of inviting a Green Party senator, Grace O'Sullivan, because we had partly because we wanted a broad range of parties, and there was no Green Party TD in Cork Central there was no Green Party TD. So yeah, go right ahead, I'd say. And I'd say that Senator TD is broadly equivalent. So we never found a problem that TDs were upset that this person was only a senator or something. Whereas we kind of remember discussing that, Frank and Eileen, we did discuss that about sending an assistant, somebody from the office or something instead, and we fairly quickly decided no, we wouldn't accept that.
They were inclined to, one party wanted to send their area representatives, which means non-elected politicians. I think at the first meeting, if I remember, it's a good while ago now, but I think we actually invited the parties to send representatives. And Rob said they sent a B list, which was understandable because it was they were campaigning hard at the time, but it was more like a Z list that they sent rather than a B list, because they sent people who knew nothing about it. The Labour Party sent a young lady who knew nothing at all about their policy, and she had been only told about 2 hours beforehand. And I think they realized when they saw the numbers, this was a disaster. We certainly, when we failed to get any Fine Gael, and I'm not sure which of them this was, we did try to get a Fine Gael senator from the constituency.
Lombard came. Tim Lombard eventually was the.
That's right. But before that, Rob, you may remember we were looking for Senator Jerry Buttimer. So we were flexible about it. We were kind of learning as we went. But then after that, I think when we had Timmy Dooley at one stage, who's a deputy from Clare, but Micheál Martin specifically asked him to come when Micheál Martin himself couldn't come. And that was a measure of the respect we had gained from Micheál Martin, I guess.
Agreed. Can just quickly on Frank's point there about our first event where we had the Z lists. Although one of them is now a TD, Frank, Timmy Gould was at that. But in hindsight, that was actually a very successful event, because from then on, they didn't send their Z list anymore. When they saw the number of people we had at that was our first, that was us gaining cachet as a group. And from then on, we found it much easier to put on events. So, that's what I always felt, that the number of attendees or bums on seats is crucial. And if you don't quite get the panelists the first time, they'll know about it, and as Oisín said, I think the mass lobby back in November was the beginning of our cachet as an organizing group. Hopefully that'll be the foot in the door.
Sean and then Bernadette, and then I said in the chat we'll formally finish at 8:15. I want to respect people's time. So those two questions for sure, and then there's a couple of housekeeping or future notices. Sean.
Hi, Rob or Frank. I was just wondering, are the meetings quite one way, in terms of panel asking questions? Is there time for the constituents to get a chance to speak as well?
So, Rob, I'm not sure if you could hear that. I know what you said, Sean. You brought up because you put it in the chat box earlier on. Was it all one way, or did constituents get a chance to actually speak on the evening?
Yes.
Go ahead, Frank.
Yes, they did. There was, I think you said, Rob, it's about 40 to 50 minutes we left for that. A couple of the constituents started to give rather long harangues, complaining, and they had to be allowed, of course. But in general, I think people were encouraged not to attack, but to ask questions or look for clarification. So we tried to respect that notion that this was giving the politicians a platform to say what they wanted to say. It was up to us to judge afterwards, but not to attack them back. But yeah, I think that would be a really important part, that people would be able to respond and debate, but they weren't invited to debate with each other. I'm not saying that would necessarily be a bad thing, but it wasn't what we did. Is that right, Rob? Was that it for you? Yeah.
I'll keep going because we only have a few minutes left. Bernadette, you have a question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So just looking for a bit of clarification how the meeting or the town hall event was run. You mentioned that there was 2 to 3 questions given to the TDs in advance, So then what happened when people arrived? Were the TDs given a certain length of time per question? Did you go through the 3 questions one after the other? When was the questions asked from the constituents and so on?
Yeah, we did it. Actually, one thing I failed to mention is that at several of those events we had an invited speaker, to kind of an invited expert speaker. So Cliona Sharkey from Trócaire spoke at that divestment one, gave the background to the bill and the reason. She spoke about the urgency of climate action. We had a law professor from UCC speaking at another event. That was often the opener. Then we did. I think we did question 1 and went to each panelist for question 1. Then we did question 2, went to each panelist for that, etc. And finally, then we went to the floor. I do seem to remember were we very specific about time? Depended on the number of panelists we had. If we had a bigger number of panelists, yeah, maybe we needed to keep it moving. Smaller number of panelists, less so. But like these men and women are professional speakers. They've been in many of these situations. I remember I was chairing one of them, and I was kind of getting a question from the audience and going to the panel, and it was all taking too long. And I remember the panelists, like the TDs, started saying, "Look, take 2 or 3 questions at a time, and we'll try and get to them like that." There's a lot of these are people who know what they're doing, I suppose, as well.
Thanks, Rob. Peter, I know you want to come in, but actually just before I do that, Anya, you've got a very good question that I'm interested in the answer to myself. Do you want to, Anya from Dublin Fingal, do you want to ask it yourself, or will we read it from the chat box? Are you there? I'm not seeing you. In the interest of time, I'll ask it for you. So her question, Anya's question was interesting. Is how did you convince the TDs to come along to a meeting with other TDs present? I can imagine some would prefer individual meetings. Was that an issue at all?
I wonder, Eileen, if you were there, you were the woman who was inviting the most important TD of all, like Micheál Martin, along. Are you still there, Eileen? Anyway, I don't remember it being a particular problem. No, I found them they're well used to these situations. I remember one time asking Mick Barry, we had 2 Fianna Fáil TDs, and Mick Barry, there's Eileen, yeah. Did you want to say something? Do you want to speak on that, Eileen?
Sorry, I was muted. Just to say, I think because we started from a place of respect for each of the politicians, that they trusted us. I think that was the main thing. And I think it did provide a platform for them to say about what their policy was as well. So I think they were glad to come. And we always praise them as well for their, you've mentioned this already, Rob, praise them for any policy that they made that was really helpful to us as people. For example, Micheál Martin with the banning cigarette smoking in public places and so on. So that was important to us, that we respect them and that we came from a place of kindness, because if the world is to change at all, I think we have to engage from both kindness and respect, no matter who the person is or what party or whatever. So that would be our basic value, I suppose, or was anyway. Yeah.
Just to add to Bernadette's question, we didn't actually succeed in getting the government party at the time, Fine Gael, to come. They didn't want to show up with other politicians, it seems.
In fairness, Frank, we tended to ask. I mean, I suppose we're an unusual constituency. 3 of our 4 TDs are cabinet ministers, and Simon Coveney was already like, it was he we were never going to get Simon Coveney when he's the Minister for Foreign Affairs, and this time around we're not going to get Micheál Martin and we're not going to get Michael McGrath. But nonetheless, if we do organise it, they will know about it and they will get back to Eileen, and they will be aware of us. They'll be too busy to come, but they will know about us.
And in terms of Bernadette's question as well, the tables get turned in a way from the assumption of your question, Bernadette, where it's not that they're coming to be with other TDs, but if they don't come, they're missing the opportunity and their absence is noted. So they have an incentive to come in that sense.
I'm conscious, having promised that to end at 8:15, we're still going, so I'll wrap it up now, but as quickly as practical. But I do see an interesting point from Maureen there in the chat box about how do you deal with members of the public who come to use their time to vent anger at a specific politician, and they've occasionally had people who brought on that. I'd say a couple of things on that. One is, I mean, like in public meetings, that is often the case. I actually, funny enough, think that Zoom possibly makes that less likely for some reason.
That's what the mute button is for, Maureen.
I actually think the self-regulation part, actually, I don't know, maybe it's because you're looking at yourself and all the faces. You can't stand at the back of the room and harangue in the way that there's always at least one who wants to do that in a public meeting. I think it's just a bit different on Zoom. And our experience of the One Future and Dr. McKay's mass lobby last December was interesting. There've been quite a lot of angst, to put it at its mildest, among activist circles and grassroots circles about the programme for government and about the Greens in government and what that may be, where they're selling out and so on. And there've been a fair bit of argy-bargy on Twitter, which is as far from democratic civilization as one gets these days. And yet none of that happened online. Even though we were online in those Zoom meetings, it was all because it's not in person, but it is face-to-face, albeit digital face-to-face. And it did change the atmosphere when you were talking to somebody and someone was talking to you. So there's no guarantee that there'll be nobody who wants to grandstand and harangue. But so we can, of course, look for tips, which definitely include the mute button, for how to deal with that. But in terms of giving the facilitators, the hosts, the confidence to know that the silent majority are on their side when they need to do that, and maybe laying out the ground rules in advance and so on. Rob, when you and I we were talking about that the culture of the One Future so far has been one of respectful, critical, and firm engagement, but respectful being part of that. That's could be a real issue. We'll definitely return to it. I'm really conscious of time, so I'm going to wrap there with a couple of housekeeping notes. But first of all, just to thank Rob and Frank and Eileen and the other members of Cork Climate Action who have shared their really considerable experience and wisdom with us this evening. So thank you really very much for that. I do want to, while I'm giving the other housekeeping notes, I want to, those of you who think, again, not on your own, but who think that you would be, as one of the things you might think about doing in the coming few months, that after this, yes, you're up for the idea of having a Zoom meeting with your TDs in your local constituency. Can you stick it, if we won't hold you to this, can you stick a yes in the box, in the chat box, just to get a sense of whether or not there's an appetite for this. So what did I want to just finish the housekeeping notes? Yes, we are going to, there'll be an email in the coming days, both to the One Future list, but also to the Friends of the Earth and Dr. McKay's supporter lists with an autumn webinar series, which we'll probably, if nobody here objects, brand as being a One Future autumn webinar series, because we want it to be, it won't only be for people who are already involved, but we do want it to be for those who want to get more involved, as opposed to those who just want to come to webinars or just want to send emails. So we want to kind of build it around that idea of getting more involved. We have two of them set up already. One you know about already, or some of you will know about already. It's the second half of the, I think they're called Labo, the people who did a group dynamics and facilitation skills workshop with some of you from One Future back in June. The second half, or the follow-up to that, will be on the 28th of September. I think that was in one of the emails you've got already. I say I think because some of this goes by me too fast these days. So there'll be more details about that reiterated. And again, not like tonight, but that's very much a how do we run a good group? How do we keep a healthy collegial group going? But in the meantime, first of all, next Tuesday, the 21st of September, we're going to have a session called Climate Campaigning What's Next, because that's the working title, where Jerry McEvely from the head of policy from Friends of the Earth, who will be the boss of the new side, to talk about, so himself, he's an energy policy specialist in most of his work. Dr. Ciara Murphy from the Jesuit Centre, who's on the steering committee of Stockholm Case, but whose specialty is the Green New Deal and the social justice dimension of climate action, and Conor O'Neill from Christian Aid, which is an overseas aid agency, like Throgher and Oxfam, and who are all three of those represented on the steering committee of Stockholm Case, who will talk about the UN conference, the COP, which he intends to go to, and the issues that are at stake in that, and Ireland's role in that. And the other people we've invited who have said yes, but haven't given us a name yet, are Dublin Fridays for Future, because they're organising a school strike as part of a new global school strike on the 24th of September. And they have very coherent demands about the policy, where policy should be going. And we thought we'd give them a platform to share that with all of you, and to plug the strike. So that's this is Monday, so that's tomorrow week, and then 2 weeks from today will be the one on the internal workings of your group, and then we'll do another couple in October at least between then and the UN conference in November. Probably one around the climate action plan, which should be due out then for sure, because you guys have all worked on that. And we'll keep filling those in. There may be a couple more between now and Christmas, and or now and the end of autumn. So that's just, I wanted to let you guys know, as those who are here tonight, give you first the heads up on that. And there'll be we will have a registration form for all of those, but effectively be the registration form to go onto the One Future list. And you can choose not to get one. You're already on it, but then if people who do that will then get the Zoom link for the meetings. And that is everything, I think.